Hello, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, Everything Product. So, we talk about the latest technologies with a product mindset. I'm Sid Saladi. I work as a product manager for Best Buy.
Hi everyone, this is Funny Voyuru. I'm a product manager at a startup.
So, thanks a lot for everybody who has followed us so far. So, last week we kind of ended our sprint on breaking into product management series. We did a lot of content on how to crack product management interviews. We did a couple of mocks and all of that stuff. So, if you are interested to check that content, please check our previous videos. But now again, we are back with a bang with product management concept. So we are going to talk about experimentation today. So very excited. So let's get started. We talk about what are the types of experimentations which we can do. We'll also talk about some real life examples and also talk about how did these experiments add value to the product or reduce costs and things like that. So Funny, excited about experimentation.
Yeah, one of my favorite topics, Sidhu.
Okay, perfect, man. Let's get started, Funny. So, why do you think experimentation is needed for a product or a product manager, I'd say?
Yeah, definitely, Sidhu. So let's start with this, right? So as a product manager, what is the most important thing that we need to deliver? The most important thing is identifying the right products that our customers need and delivering them as fast as possible. But many a times what happens is we might not be able to define exactly what feature is needed by the customer. But we might have several discussions through comparative analysis, or we might have several ideas from our team saying, hey, this might be something that's really interesting. So, in such scenarios, we need to quickly validate those hypotheses without wasting too much of our engineering effort. Engineering effort is like, it's always crucial and we can't waste any of that effort. So, at that point, experimentation plays a very key role. It helps us identify the right products with the limited resources and with the limited time, and it also eliminates the risk of wasting time and resource and staffing that we have from our product. What do you think?
Yeah, very, very well said, Funny. So, I feel that, it's very hard to predict what the customer wants or what's there out in the market, right? So the only way we could do it is putting the product out and running some experimentations to see if it's actually doing the thing which we want or not. If anybody comes to you saying that I know exactly what the customer knows without any experimentation, he's either lying or maybe he's like trying to predict what the customer actually wants to. So I'd say prototyping is a very key element in any product development or any product manager's journey, right? So there are, as you said, there are a lot of advantages to it, right? You could actually accelerate the development process by doing multiple experiments, validating ideas. You could basically that could experiment could be a data backing for hypotheses which you have through the product. It could reduce the risk which you have into development costs and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of different advantages which you can get from experimentation.
If you have watched our video for so long, I hope you guys are enjoying all the topics that we are discussing. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
So Funny, maybe let's I would say dig deep into what are the different types of experiments, and I'll maybe go through a list of experiments, types of experiments we'll do. I'll give a brief description, and after that we can talk about our experiences with using some of these experimenting tools. How does it sound like?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So when you look at the types of experiments, right? I think experiments could vary by the product which you are building, right? So it could vary by the nature of the product, by the state of the product, by is it a software product, hardware product, and all of that stuff. So that's why there are different experiments, types of experiments which you can conduct to verify, the hypothesis which you have through the product. So A/B testing is one way of doing it. To put it into very simple terms, it's basically showing the user two different variations of the product and seeing which is the most easiest or effective way for the user to use the product, right? So that's A/B testing in a very simple simple language. There's also multivariate testing. Multivariate testing is more about having multiple variations. In A/B testing, you just have two, but in multivariate, you could have three or four different versions, and then pick the most popular version, or the version which actually has the more traction. This all depends on what experiment you're running and what the goal of the experiment is. So that's multivariate testing for you. And there's also usability testing, right? So this is a set of experiment where you will actually give a prototype to the user, or a kind of a flow, how the app or the product goes through, and the person actually goes through the complete flow to see if it's matching what he wants to do or not. So that's usability tests. And there's also simple surveys which you can go and ask the customers of what they specifically want, what they're looking for, and all of that stuff. So that could also be an experiment to test your hypothesis. The final one is prototyping, where you actually put together a very low fidelity prototype or a high fidelity prototype, put it on in the hands of the customer, and see how the customer is actually using it. So these are the different types of experiments which you can do with your product. So again, going through the list, it's A/B testing, multivariate testing, usability testing, surveys, and also prototyping. So funny, now comes the exciting part, right? So let's maybe talk about A/B testing here. Can you maybe tell me any real life example you had while doing A/B testing, and how did that change the course of your product?
Yeah, absolutely, Sidhu. So, like you said, right? Let's start with the basic definition. What is A/B testing? So, you're trying to build a product for the customer. You have a current state, what the customer is using, and let's say you have another state, which is basically the idea that you want to show to the customer. So, let's take Intuit as an example, right? Intuit has few products that has millions and millions of customers. So, you don't want to roll out something that you don't know whether it will work or not. So what you'll basically do is you'll build another version of the product, and then you will do an A/B test where 50% of the customers go to your version A, which could be the current state of the product, and then you will be sending the remaining 50% of the customers to the new state, and you will continue to test how your metrics are performing for this A/B test. So I'll give you an example of what I did. So the product that I used to own at Intuit is basically a connections platform where customers can come search for their financial institutions, connect and go. So we honestly did a bunch of experiments where we tried to identify the right financial institutions the customers already have, show them and see whether they're clicking them or not. So we were validating how is the click-through rate for the customer when we show those personalized experiences. We use different kinds of data to validate which data is performing better for which customers. So this is the real world example of what I did for Mint and few other products at Intuit. But it was able to clearly explain us that our metrics were continually going up and our customers were able to continually connect more financial institutions faster by having personalized experiences.
Yeah, so I'd say I think A/B testing can be used for products, or also you could run experiments inside the product itself, right? So a couple of examples is, right, look, a lot of e-commerce, like Best Buy is an e-commerce electronic specialty retailer. There's like Amazon, there's Target, and all of these. So holiday is a very big revenue generator for all of these companies. So everybody prepares for holiday. So I think before the holiday, there are hundreds of tests that are run. So these basically are targeted to a very small set of people, not the complete traffic, right? And they have multiple different variations of that, where they experiment on banner ads, they experiment on discounts, they experiment on all of these things, where how many people would convert if you show a specific version of this template, and how many would convert if there's another version, and all of that stuff. All of these data is collected and learned, and again the experiments are refined so that everybody kind of has the best click-through rate when the actual holiday time comes in, because I think that's where you have maximum number of traffic towards the website for people to buy and all of that stuff. So that's one
Got it.
example where A/B testing is used kind of thoroughly to figure out like how to improve the conversion rate.
Nice. Actually, let me ask a question there, Sidhu. So you said there could be like multiple experiments that are running at the same time, right? How do you come up with these hypotheses, or how do you write these hypotheses?
Yeah, so I'd say every time when you do this, right? So you could go and do experiments out in the air, but it's very difficult to understand the results if you don't have a goal on why you're actually doing the experiment, right? So I normally tend to follow a couple of steps to kind of do while running experiments. The first one is define a clear problem or a hypothesis which we want to kind of validate, right? So maybe let's take an example of a fitness app. Funny, in the fitness app, right, like I would say I want more increase engagement of the user. So how would I do that? Maybe I'll then think of, can I gamify? My hypothesis could be, if I gamify the app, there would be 30% more increase in engagement of the users inside the app. So then my hypothesis would be gamification would increase the engagement by 30%. And my goal would be to increase the engagement by 30% for that experiment. Then I pick metrics for that experiment, right, where you could measure engagement by the time the person spends on the website or the app, the number of pages he clicks, or the number of interactions he has. So then you define the metric. After you define the metric, then you choose the type of experiment, where for this specific experiment I would pick A/B testing, because I'll maybe try two different ways of gamification and see which is the best one, which increases the engagement for that specific thing. After which, right, I'll plan the experiment. Planning the experiment is basically figuring out who the target audience would be, who would this be shown, and how many people would be shown. And how do I recruit? Do I already have a sample people of set of people who can see these experiments and all of that stuff? Once I do that, I conduct the experiments and then analyze the results and see if my hypothesis is right or wrong, and would it actually improve my goal of the engagement. If that is right, then I do it on a wide scale, where I actually use the version which worked out really good. So that's the way I would actually put a experiment together. How about you, Funny?
Very similar approach, actually. Like like you said, right, let's take the same example, the fitness app that you're talking about. So I would define the hypothesis to say, hey, if we personalize the experience for the customer, then there would be an increase in the overall conversion, or overall, what is the metric you're using? Engagement,
Engagement.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. Actually, I'll go back and do it again. So very similar approach, Sidhu. So let's take the same example that you were talking about, right? The fitness app. So the idea or the hypothesis basically would be, the structure that we typically follow is, if we personalize the experience on the fitness app, then the customer will be more inclined to taking more actions and eventually increase our engagement. And the way we would measure this, by a 5% increase in the overall engagement for the customer. And then we'll also try to define the guardrail metrics, where while this is happening, I want to make sure there is no churn, or the churn is not higher than the typical churn that we have for the apps and stuff. So by defining this, we clearly know what we are targeting for. And once the experiment starts, we'll continue to monitor how each of the cohorts is performing. And then once we know that there is statistically significant amount of customers that have already tested this, then we conclude the experiment to say whether it is successful or not successful.
Yeah, I think I want to highlight a very important point you mentioned, Funny. Statistically significant, right? So I think that is very important, because I think young product managers or product managers who are in their first, second years actually might not have relevant data while they're doing these experiments, and think that the results are actually pointing towards something which is validating their hypothesis. I think I've fallen into that trap, where I had surveyed people and conducted experiment, but that was not enough sample size, or not was not targeting the right customer, where I was like, my assumptions were wrong there. So I think don't fall into that trap. So that's a really good thing you highlighted.
Yeah, that is true, because you don't want to come to a conclusion too fast, or you don't want to wait too late where other factors are impacting your experiment.
Yeah.
That's one more important thing, right? When you're running an A/B test, you need to make sure there is minimal number of additional variables that could impact your experiment. Otherwise, what would end up happening is, let's say you're trying to launch an experiment right in the middle of a peak season that you're talking about. Then the peak season might be impacting the total number of customers who are
That's
actually
right.
taking actions rather than the actual new experience that you built.
Yeah, that's right. Very, very, very true, Funny. So imagine that holiday season, you get 50% of the customers you get the whole year, right? Then you conduct an experiment and think that this is just because my experiment, I'm getting so much traffic. That's like a wrong assumption there, right? So I think, yeah, it's pretty valid there. Okay, so that's
Yep.
good. So we have like went deep into A/B testing, right? Maybe let's also talk about multivariate testing. Multivariate
Mhm.
testing is having multiple different versions and seeing like what set of people are reacting to which version better and all of that stuff. So what's your personal experience with multivariate testing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm usually very conscious when I try to do some kind of a multivariate test, and I got burnt as well a few times in the past. So the typical thought process in multivariate testing is, let's take a screen, right? Let's take the e-commerce screens that you're talking about. So right now, let's say if I think of Amazon, Amazon has different kind of what do you say, swim lanes, or the personalized swim lanes where they tell people like you also bought this. Because you bought this, we are showing you this. Netflix also follows the same thing, right? Because you watch this, I'm showing these additional tiles for you. So that's the personalization that they're giving to customers, and they also have like different kinds of buttons and stuff. So when you have a thought process to, let's say, revamp this entire website, how do you test this? You can't basically keep changing each thing in that screen and then waiting for each experiment to finish so that you can conclude the results and come back to a final visual, right? That's not possible. So what you basically do is you try to combine a few of these things and then give that experience to the customer. And it could be, you might be playing around with different colors, you might be playing around with uh, personalization itself, you might be changing the order of some of these things, etc., to see how the click-through rate works. So you define these different versions that you have, define different kinds of cohorts that you want to test this with, and for each of these cohorts you see different experience. And similar to what you do for A/B testing, you will continue to validate your test for like certain amount of time until you have statistically significant traffic or statistically significant number of customers. And then you conclude to say, okay, this variation, which has these multiple variants, worked well compared to the others.
Perfect. And also to put it into very simple layman's term, right? There could be multiple different versions validating different hypotheses against different set of customers where you gather all of this to see what actually makes sense.
Yep. And many times that happens too, because you might want to give a different text to the customer and different buttons or the layout that could give you a better conversion than having one variation of just one button and figuring out whether it helps or not.
Yeah, that's right. Also funny, I think a lot of people might have already experienced this, right, while using apps. I feel sometimes there are features that pop up in my app which is not the same with some other people, right? So they are actually doing A/B tests where sometimes I see a different version and my wife sees a different version. And also I see this a lot with Netflix, right? Where whenever I share a picture of a movie, right, the poster might be different for me than the poster which my parents see in India. So that also could be a different version based on how people react to and all of that stuff, or they're running experiments to see what has more click through rate, right? Another example, funny, I think we should also talk about this, right? A simple example could be you changing your thumbnail on the YouTube video, right? You could have two different versions and see which version has a better click through rate. That's A/B testing, as simple as it is, right? Okay, perfect. So that's good. So we have covered A/B testing and multivariate testing now. So now let's get into usability testing. Funny. So what is your experience with usability tests?
I love usability tests, though. So these are some of the tests which can give like extremely fast results, right? Because when you're doing A/B testing or multivariate testing, what are you doing? You're basically creating an actual product and giving it to the customer to test it out. But when you're doing a usability test, the primary difference is you will not be able to do at a scale of what you do for A/B testing, because usability test you probably like recruit limited number of customers, or you use some of the websites where you can find customers and ask them to like use it. I mean, that unmoderated tests basically. But you might not get the entire scale of A/B tests. But the way usability tests help is you can actually see how the customer is actually using the product. And many times you'll be able to figure out the exact pain points that customer is going through for a product. And this will be extremely useful when you're trying to build an entire flow for the customer. Let's say you're building an experience where you want a customer to fill a form. You'll be able to see where the customer is like struggling to like find out or understand some of the things that you're building. What do you think?
Yeah, and also sometimes sometimes you'll be surprised the way the customer is actually using the product than it is intended to be used, right? So that's also, I find that pretty amazing when I do that. Yeah, funny. I think a couple of examples which I had, right, for usability tests. We were developing internal tools at Bosch, right? So one of the first prototype of that tool was basically a UI with all the different things the user could do. We gave it to a bunch of people who could actually use that and see how they are using it. So people were struggling because it had so many options. People didn't know where to go. So they again have to go and see, figure out where the user guide is, then go through the user guide, and then basically come back to try to use that specific tool. I think that was a very, very bad experience, right? So I think what we learned is we could actually eliminate the necessity of the user guide itself by uh, helping the customer to navigate through the tool, where you just show one option every time and he selects, and once he does that, then you actually the person gets the job done which he wants to do. So that's a very easy way where you can improve the overall experience of a product by showing it to the customer and see how he's actually using it. So I also have another example, funny, where we haven't taken the feedback of the customer on the usability test. So when I was working with Bosch, right, we were developing automotive diagnostic tools. These are like tablet kind of tools which you hooked up to the vehicle, and you kind of run a bunch of codes and see how the vehicle is doing, how all of the sensors are doing, and all of that stuff, right? So that's general diagnosis a technician does. But the previous versions of the tool actually had hardware buttons on top of it, and the plan was to introduce touch screen, right? But when uh, we were showing this to a lot of these technicians, they hated the touchscreen because, right, the touchscreen changes every time, right? But when you use a tool with buttons, they develop that muscle memory where they don't have to look at the screen, right? So they can work really, really fast to get through what the job which you have to do. But when they are using the touch screen, right, they again have to come back to the screen to see what are the different options are and then click through that. So, but the problem with having the hardware is it's costly. You cannot do software updates as frequently as a tablet and all of that stuff. I think this already kind of was a problem while moving from BlackBerry to iPhone, but people adapted towards it. And now even Tesla, right, people are used to knobs and all in the cars, but they're now adapted to using a tablet in between the car, right? The same way at Bosch, right? Even though people liked the buttons, we had the touchscreen where we were much faster and having more options and more features for the customers, even though intermittently they were, kind of getting slower while they are doing work. So that's like an opposite thing which we had to do, even though the results said something different.
And that's a great example, Sidhu, because I think most of the tests that I have done are always like software based. I mean, I've worked on all software products, but that's a great example to understand that experimentation is not just for like software products; it works for hardware products as well. And one more thing is like you're mentioning, right? Tesla went to a full screen with no buttons. My opinion is buttons are better there, at least some buttons. But let's
Yeah, that's right.
see.
Yeah, that's right. But there are upsides and downsides, right? The upsides are you can have an update every 1 hour. But the traditional car automakers, right, they have an update every newer version comes in, or whenever you go for an oil change, right? So you don't have over the air updates and all of that stuff. So yeah, they're like the give and take on both the sides, I'd say.
That's true.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, we have covered three different topics now, right? Like we have talked about A/B testing, multivariate testing, and also usability tests. Let's get into prototyping. Prototyping is a very vast subject, right? Funny. So you could do a lot of different things with prototyping. So like, give us a first-hand experience of prototyping and how did that help?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to that personalization example that we were talking about, right? When we were thinking about that, it was very tough to like exactly design what we wanted to do. So many a times we try to have these design jam sessions with a bunch of stakeholders together. It will be engineering, support, product, design, and everyone together to say, hey, this is the problem that we are trying to solve. How do we want to solve it? So during those sessions, we'll come up with few prototypes to say maybe we want to have this type of content, this type of click to action buttons, etc., and come up with few ideas to say, hey, this is how we want to visualize the product to the customer. And these can be taken as a usability test or like randomized test for the customers, and get the actual first hand experience of how the customer is actually using it. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So I think I would say prototyping has been my superpower. Like from the time I've been a product manager, because I have done a lot of design thinking workshops in getting idea, a product from idea to actually the launch. So while doing this, prototyping plays a very very important role here, because I think I believe in people sitting together defining the problem, and once they have the problem, creating multiple different solutions there, and then you come up with like 5 or 6 iterations of it and make it a better version, and then you kind of end up with something which you want to build in the next 6 months, right? So that kind of validates a lot of hypotheses and problems, and actually gives the feel to the people of what the final version would look like. So I'm a very very big fan of doing that. Otherwise it's just people assuming that the product would be this way, and then after 6 months, right, when they look at the product is doing completely different, right? So there's, I think, also meme where this is what the person promises, and they end up with something completely different. So I think prototype helps us reduce a lot of risk, validate assumptions, and also help us with visually putting things together. And also I feel that funny, when people are together in a room trying to prototype a solution for a problem, they are much more productive. And also I feel that they're in that flow state where they basically try to put something together that actually really is useful to the user. Now in the
That is true.
remote world, it is very tough to get into that. There is Miro and a lot of different tools, but I miss those days where you bring in bunch of people together to solve things, and get a prototype after like a week or so.
That is true, Sidhu. Actually, I love prototyping as well. And many times, what happens is even if you don't have a lot of expertise, whenever you're trying to like whiteboard it, or whenever you're trying to like put your thoughts on a paper, you can visually show something easily compared to explaining something through like words or paragraphs to someone. And when you're trying to like show an idea to a customer, and if we actually prototype something and show it to a customer, you'll be getting much faster feedback rather than actually doing like a usability testing or like A/B testing or anything like that, which would take an actual dev effort to have a product and then test it.
Yeah, that's right. And also, like, prototypes could vary in lot of comes with a lot of different shapes, sizes, and all of that, right? It could be a low fidelity prototype as simple as a sketch on a paper, right? Or it could be a high fidelity prototype where you maybe actually make it look like a real product, and you make the people click through stuff and all of that stuff. So it could vary in multiple things. So what I tell anybody who talks to me about building something, right? Say build something over the weekend, right? Then you'll actually know all the problems that comes with building this. Is it solving a problem? A lot of that. And also I somewhere I was reading through, right, the Google lens, right? The failed project where they had this thing, and they had this thing projecting maps and all of that stuff, right? The first prototype of Google Lens was built in a day. So if Google
Mm.
Lens was they are able to build Google Lens in a day, you can build anything in a day. So whatever it is, however scrappy it is, try to build it and get to the feel of it. Then you can basically validate a lot of assumptions, I'd say. So also
Right,
funny,
right.
I would
That's true.
want to mention, there is basically a book called Sprint. So this is a really good book where you can get from an idea to a product. So this gives you a plan of a 5 day workshop where you go from validating and figuring out what the problem statement is towards prototyping an idea and then finalizing the final version of multiple iterations of a prototype, right? So this is a really good book, and anybody who wants to learn more about getting through that process in a much faster way through prototyping, you can refer that book. The book is called Sprint.
Actually, one more thing, Sidhu, here is not just software, right? Even hardware products, I think, would do the same thing. Like whenever you're trying to like build something firsthand, the moment you build it, you will be able to see the issues. Um, One more thing I wanted to call out is like mobile versus web experience also, right? You might be building something on web, but unless and until you see how you want to build in mobile and then give a prototype for it, you might see that, dude, this might be too cluttered with too much data. So some of those things, prototyping would be like extremely helpful.
Yeah, and also can give an example here, funny. So I was working for GTT, right? So this was basically, we were designing traffic software where ambulance drivers and city managers could look at all of the vehicles, like city owned vehicles, on a dashboard, and they were collecting bunch of data out of that. So the we were basically building a product which had a dashboard with all of these metrics and all. So we used prototyping for that, right? So what we did was, we had first iteration, showed it to a couple of people, and they liked it a lot, and they gave us feedback on like what metrics they need and where should it exist and all of that stuff. We incorporated that feedback, kind of launched initial MVP. But what we found out is, once people started using the MVP, the metrics which were we had on the dashboard were good for only a set of customers. The other set of customers wanted a different set of metrics. That's where we had to add another feature on top of it, where people could drag and drop different metrics and create a dashboard for them, which is a customizable dashboard. So I think these are very, very good learnings, right? So if I would have not talked to the customers and built something and given it to them, right, I should have there would have been a lot of rework which I had to do to create the dashboard which the customers would like. So I think use experiments to validate your hypothesis and make the better more valuable, right? And to the user, I'd say.
If you have watched that video for so long, I hope you guys are enjoying all the topics that we are discussing. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
Okay, funny. Yeah, so we have talked about all of this different tests, right? But uh, sometimes most of them could be applicable for something with a UI, right? What about backend systems and all? Can we use experiments for validating some of these? What is your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, Sidhu. I feel like front end testing is very minimal in terms of A/B testing, and this is only applicable for like probably like big websites or like big company where they have like huge amount of volumes. Like let's say Yelp or Best Buys or Amazons of the world want to do like a lot of front end testing. But let's take a very well known example, right? Let's take Netflix. Do you think they'll be doing a lot of front end testing? I mean, front end A/B tests and stuff. If you think of Netflix UI for the last 1 year, I don't think it changed a lot. They still have the same scrolls. They still have same titles. They probably will be changing the order of the tiles and stuff. But other than that, the front end looks very much same. But Netflix is one of the companies who does crazy amount of testing, and the way they do the testing is all back in data. So
Okay.
the way they would be testing there could be models. So for example, you have a new model that basically personalizes the experience in a better way. That's a new test that they're doing as well. Like you were telling, right? You might be seeing different recommendations than your wife, or even the thumbnails and stuff than your wife. All they're basically testing here is the backend algorithm rather than testing the front end click through rate. Front end click through rate is basically telling us what the customer is seeing, but what are they actually testing is the model or the data that they're gathering from the customer and how useful that is. And the same
Yeah.
thing applies to companies which doesn't have crazy amount of customers as well. Like if you're using operations or like support teams and stuff, you can do a bunch of experiments with just your backend systems without even having a front end.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Funny. So I think there are platform teams inside every organization, right? So these platform teams actually maintain a bunch of internal tools. So these teams basically cater to the engineering teams and the developers, right? So they have a lot of backend systems where they might not have UI, right? There could be security baked in, there could be pipelines baked in, there could be boilerplate code baked in. So all of this could also be experimented with to see how the actual customers who are the developers or the developing teams are using these products for. So that's also another way of looking at backend systems on experimentation, I'd say.
That's true. Yep.
Yeah. So I think we went into a lot of different examples, Funny, and also talked about different experimentation. But if I were to ask you, right, like what are the two big takeaways on experimentation, what would they be?
Definitely, Sidhu. The first one I would say is the mindset. So if you're a product manager and if you're working on any kind of product, always keep that experimentation and hypothesis in mind before you build anything. That would help you and your team save a lot of time and money before you launch a feature to the customer. And the second one is metrics. So whenever you're doing experimentation, right, thoroughly think through the metrics that you want to track and thoroughly think through all the guardrail metrics that you want to keep so that you don't cause an impact to the customer. So have a clear thought process on what you're running, what you're measuring, and what you don't want to impact. What are
Sure.
your
So
takeaways?
yeah, so what would I say is like as a product manager, I feel that your role is more to reduce the uncertainty around a product, right? And the only way you could reduce uncertainty is through experimentation. So have that experiment first mindset and try to validate every assumption you have. Otherwise, it's easy for us to make stories in our mind and which are influenced by our biases, thinking that oh, this would be a wonderful product and everybody would be like jumping right in whenever we launch it, right? So that's what my dream uh, is, right, for every product. But that's not true, right? When you go into the market and the customer, everything is different, right? You never know what they want and how they use the product and all of that stuff. As you said, go with that experiment first mindset. And the second one is, I think just going with that experiment mindset doesn't serve the purpose, but go with a goal and hypothesis which you want to validate. And I think that'll help you get better results out of the experimentation which you're trying to do. So these both are my takeaways. Okay, perfect. So I think this was a very interesting conversation. So everybody, please stay tuned for what we are going to talk for the next weeks. We are going to come up with a lot of different product management concepts, and also we'll be doing more and more interviews with product leaders in the coming weeks. So please stay tuned.
Thanks, everyone.